Voices, a platform that amplifies the voices and stories of African women and provide a space for African women to share their experiences, challenges, achievements, and perspectives on a variety of topics. The podcast aims to promote gender equality, empower African women, and foster a sense of community and solidarity amongst the listeners. Today's episode will be focused on a topic that I believe most African women across the diaspora have unfortunately encountered. So you've probably read about it on social media, although in small scales because it hasn't been amplified and received the attention and focus that it needs to,
Yeah, I think the
especially
voice goes
pertaining to
away
women's
for a
safety and
while.
security, which is a great topic for us as we seek to empower women in high conflict zones and become allies for the situations that they're facing and partnering obviously with grassroots organizations that are ensuring that the groundwork is done for women in these zones. So just to give you
I think your voice
context and
goes off
background
and
of what is
on.
currently happening, we will be I'll give you a background of what exactly the topic will focus on. As I said before, we are working on just highlighting what's happening in high conflict zones, and I have an incredible guest who I will introduce shortly. So there has been violent confrontations that broke out on April 15th, 2023 between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces in Sudan. And then this has led to a displacement of over 8.6 million individuals internally and externally. The conflict heightened numerous pre existing challenges in Sudan, including conflict, disease outbreaks, and economic and political instability. That added with climate crisis. Before the conflict happened, Sudan was already involved in numerous challenges stemming obviously from the Darfur crisis that began in 2003, resulting in violence and displacement. So we're sort of seeing a pattern of what happened in 2003 replicating itself in 2023 and going into 2024, which is why today's discussion is very important. Um, Before that, the country obviously has other elements to it. So, as I said, there are ongoing conflicts, there's disease outbreaks, and the country also hosts over 1 million refugees, right? So, those refugees are also affected by what is currently happening. As you guys may recall, in 2019, the president of Sudan was removed and there were hopes around civilian rule, but a military coup led to political and economic turmoil. There has been several vulnerabilities within the Sudan, in Sudan specifically, and for us as African female voices, the concern has been about highlighting the issue that is affecting women. So the big question for us is always how are these conflict zones or whatever is happening in these conflict zones, how is it affecting women? As it stands, millions of women and girls have been displaced from their homes, contributing to the country's worst levels of food and insecurity. There are women who have been deprived of essential resources for survival, such as food, medical care, and shelter. Hospitals are also affected. So 80% of the hospitals are affected. And obviously, access to reproductive health and protection is a hot topic in Sudan. So these conditions, I believe, set the ground for us as African female voices to really explore what is happening in Sudan. How can we be allies? And what better way to get insight through our guest today? So I am privileged to be joined by Niemat Ahmadi, an activist who serves as the founder and president of the Darfur Women's Group. Welcome, Niemat. It's a pleasure to have you on our episode.
Oh, thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to join you.
I have said a mouthful in terms of what's happening in Sudan, but I think for guests who are listening in on this episode, they would like to know who you are. I know it's easy to go onto the Darfur Women's Group and even Google You are a very prominent name in the activism space, but if you could just briefly introduce yourself, your background, and your role in the Darfur Women's Action Group.
Well, thank you. As you said, my name is Niemat Ahmadi. I'm originally from Darfur, and I have fled Darfur in the early, the first genocide in the 21st century that started around 2002, 2003. And because of being outspoken, um, uh, resisting what the government was doing against our people at that time, speaking out against the Darfur genocide, I was targeted and was threatened. And after several attempts, I had to flee the country for my life. And before I flee, I did not want to leave my country and my homeland because I wasn't an exception. The genocidal attack was targeting everyone, people from my tribe, indigenous African people that were singled out, selected to be targeted. So I refused to flee, but I was told that because I was outspoken, and if I stayed, my family and I may be hurt. And if I flee, I can be a voice for our people and tell the world what was happening in Darfur. So, with that hope that I can be a voice, I left the Sudan. And since then, I came to the United States and have joined the Safe Darfur movement and continue to speak for the people of Darfur. Also, before fleeing Sudan, I work for international NGOs in various fields of emergency relief. And then within the United States, I work in the field of human rights, policy advocacy, and genocide prevention and women issues. So, bringing to this over 23 years of work experience in these various fields. Speaking about Darfur and speaking about women issue has been the core priority for me. To sustain attention and also bring attention to the situation, not only by recognizing the plight of the women of Darfur and Sudan, but also to recognize the resilience, courage, and resolve for standing up for themselves and continue to take charge in advocating on their resolving their societal issues and keeping their community together. So I'm pleased to be a voice for them. But today, as I speak to you, unfortunately, Sudan is going through one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. So it is again the issue that has never gone away for me, and how it affects women has been overwhelming.
For that, Nimat, I think you touched on issues that I think are pertinent in this particular episode. You had firsthand experience of what was happening in Darfur in 2003. Before you fled, the government played a huge role in some of the war crimes, should I say, against people during the time in 2003.
Mhm.
I wanted to just ask you, do you see any similarities with what is currently taking place in Sudan if you compare it to what you experienced in your time? And if there are any similarities, can you maybe just know them for the audience to just have a view of what happened then and what's happening now?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think this is a very important question. The similarities and the difference between the 2003 genocidal attack and the current crisis going on in Sudan, and particularly the attack in Darfur. The similarity, it is very systematic, and it targets the same indigenous African groups who have been singled out 20 years ago for extermination. They are using the same element, ethnically driven targeting of people by killing, destroying their homes, burning villages and cities, and using rape as a weapon of war, including abducting women, using them as sexual slaves. Sometimes women are forced to render domestic service. They are also afraid to speak because of the fear of retaliation. In it is nature, it is pretty similar. What is the difference is that back in 2003, Janjaweed Arab militias who have been attacking the people of Darfur were militias in camel and horses backs, and they were militias. But now, today, they have grown into the more advanced, sophisticated military with advanced equipment, advanced weapon, advanced training, technology, and logistics, and with not only support from the government of Sudan, but now they have regional and international support being supported by the United Arab Emirates in the region, whereby uncountable amount of supplies of weapon, ammunition, and money have been bumped and flown into Darfur for these militias to destroy our very, very people and removing them and threaten their existence because simply of being African indigenous in their country. So the difference again, also back then, where the government army would come with their plane bombing villages, and then the Janjaweed will come on camel and horses. Today, they are fighting one another. Unfortunately, you can see the confrontation in Khartoum, the capital, or in other region. But when it comes to Darfur, there is very different story. It is a systemic targeting of the indigenous African people, like the slaughter of Masalid population in West Darfur last year, in June of last year. The governor was killed because he was Masalid. These people were not only killed and degraded, but they were told that now we have cleared the city of Al Junaina from the Abid, which is the word slave in Arabic. And they said no longer now Al Junaina will be called Dar Masalid, which is the homeland of Masalid. In Arabic, they said now it will be called the homeland of Arabs. And they actively start changing the neighborhood names, changing officials, killing prominent civil administration and traditional leaders who have been there, destroying the system that have been there for centuries. So these are the similarities and the differences. Also, the difference is that back then, the attack were perpetrated in the villages, in the remote rural area, whereby people will flee to the cities, and people in the cities will receive them, help them set up a camp in the outskirts of these cities. Unfortunately, today, those cities and large internal displaced camps have been under attack. And now people have nowhere to go because they first fled their villages and now they are fleeing their towns. And many areas in Darfur have no border or nearby countries to cross the border like people West Darfur. For instance, the recent attack in Al Fashir, the historical capital of Greater Darfur, and also the birthplace of the Darfur Sultanate or Darfur Kingdom, has been under siege for months, for 3 months right now. And the constant attack in the internal displaced camp in the neighborhood, including attacking the only hospital that left to render.
Sorry, Niemat. Or you have an incoming call. I'll wait.
It is really, to some it say, the least to say today, it is worse than what happened in 2003. It's also back then there were humanitarian organizations, but today Sudan have been in isolation for a year and 3 months now, where international NGOs have fled the country because of insecurity. International diplomatic communities, and even Sudanese, those who are able to flee and can afford to flee, whereby nearly 2 million people fled as refugees in the neighboring countries. Doctors, lawyers, civil society group, journalists who are able to flee, they fled the country because it is unsafe for them. But those who left have been trapped in places that have no any means of sustenance. And when the rapid support forces attack a city, they control everything, making sure that they eliminate all survival means. For example, looting food storages and burn it, looting markets and burn it, controlling water supply to the city, and looting vehicles. Even those who are trying to flee, they could not have any form of transportation to flee the cities. So people are left with two options: either to stay and die with starvation, disease, or bullets, or die with bombardment. And so these are the situation and the condition that the people of Darfur and many other areas in Sudan have been going through. And now also back then the attack was in Darfur, but today this attack has been expanded across the Sudan, including now in the central and far eastern Sudan. Has been extended.
That I think you've shared so much perspective into what's happening. I just wanna uh, focus on how this conflict is appropriately, so it's disproportionately rather affecting women and girls, right? I was reading some stats around how this is affecting women.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the stats include that women have had to flee their homes, similar to what you said now, because of the food insecurity. They are deprived of their essential resources such as food, medical care, shelter, and a failing healthcare system. I mean, 80% of the hospitals, like you said, there's only one functional hospital that has been affected by looting. They're struggling with the shortage of staff, as you said. Professionals who are in the medical field are fleeing Sudan. And for women as well, there's been a lack of access to reproductive health and protection services. I also was reading up on some additional stats around the pervasive violence, including rape, kidnappings, forced child marriages, fostering an environment of fear and hindered access to support and justice. I mean, this is not information I believe that is readily available. You have to dig deep into the data and media houses that are independent of any government influence to really get what's happening there. And I mean, the Human Rights Watch recently reported in January that Sudan has the highest rate of internal displacement in the world, with over 10 million people who have been internally displaced. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to just ask you and get your perspective on this matter. Do you think that the international community has failed Sudan? And do you also think that Sudan is getting the sufficient media coverage that it should get?
Well, I think it is indeed the world has failed Darfur and it has failed Sudan now. And because of the impunity for the past crimes that is currently, we see the crimes that are being repeated and committed again. Sudan has not been getting enough media coverage. And because, media follow politics. And when politicians are not speaking about the situation, the media doesn't care that much. And we have seen, including in our own continent, the African leaders, I think that the Sudan issue is an African issue. It is mobilization of Arabs against African, which is very existential issue. And it's also supported from the regional player who are promoting Arab nationalism or Arabization and Islamization of the African continent, located in the heart of Africa. And we have seen the way South African government have brought a case against the Israeli government. We were hoping that the same attention being given to the Gaza issue or the Gaza situation should be given to Sudan, because the number of people right now facing famine is more than 50% of the country's population, nearly 28 million people facing acute hunger. 10 million people are displaced. Most of these people are women and children. And as you stated, attack on women, the use of sexual and gender-based violence, lack of health services, everything. Like, people are now living the worst nightmare, but there is no attention. Like, generally speaking, I'm located in the United States. Like, usually in the West, when things happen in Africa, it does not get enough attention. But even within our own continent, there is not enough attention and there is not enough media attention. And that is why when media, politicians don't speak about the situation, the ordinary citizen, they don't know. They don't think that it is serious because people don't see the pictures of people dying in silence. They don't see the pictures of hospitals being burned, the internal displaced camps being burned completely to the ground. People have been killed and scattered across the streets. Like if you are traveling, you will go see a body after body, and the number of casualties are not documented today. Like so, it is unfortunately the world has failed the Sudan because it has been a year and 3 months, but the level of the attention that we see directed to other crises in the world has not been directed to the crisis unless we ourselves, we the African people and people in the continent, try to bring this to the attention of the world community. People will not care that much. And that's why I think the media attention matters. It is extremely important that the media cover these atrocity crimes that has been going on unnoticed in Sudan in order to bring attention and also to bring action needed to be taken to end this suffering and also hold those perpetrate this crime accountable. Otherwise, I think by the time the war ends, we will discover that people died in masses, and that will be a stain in our international community's soul and everyone who's having the opportunity and having the power to speak, but they choose not.
That's very powerful. You have echoed, I think, the sentiments of not just the citizens of Sudan, African people across the diaspora who have heard bits and pieces of what's happening, and they're concerned to say, why isn't this getting the coverage that it needs? And I think platforms like ours, who are dedicated to ensuring that the voices of women, particularly in Africa, are amplified, this is what we seek to do to whatever level that we can actually reach. We want to ensure that there is coverage and there is action that's taken. And I think for someone like you to actually go out there and establish an organization like the Darfur Women Action Group, which has been instrumental in ensuring that genocide survivors' voices are amplified. Affected communities are provided a platform for interested stakeholders to work with them and in advancing the unique goals. I mean, this speaks to the work that grassroots organizations have undertaken, which largely should be work that's the government undertakes, but unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. Women have to actually step up and create such organizations to ensure that the voices of women affected by such atrocities are actually amplified. I want to maybe get into your organization because I think it's very instrumental in understanding and advancing the needs and challenges that are faced by women in these high conflict zone. What inspired you? Obviously, because you're a genocide survivor, I believe that's one of the factors that inspired you to establish the Darfur Women Action Group. But maybe can you take us through why you decided to start such an and elaborate a bit on the mission and key initiatives that you are involved in within the organization to make sure that affected women and communities are actually empowered?
Well, thank you. I think this is really an important question. Speaking about my organization, Darfur Women Action Group, it is founded on in two principles, and there is a reason behind that. So, when I fled the Sudan, before I flee, I made a promise to the women who have been working tirelessly to document atrocities, keeping their community together, helping people surviving, providing service to those in need, even though women have been the most victimized and targeted, but they stood up for their community. But in most cases, when people speak, I realize even within our own anti genocide movement, people can easily speak about the number of people killed. People can speak about the number of people displaced and villages burned. But it was very hard for them to speak about how many women have been affected or how many women have been raped. And that was like a hit in the head for me to realize that women issues are not a priority for even those human rights community, people who are standing up for these issues. That was like a mind blowing and an eye opening for me. And then number two is also when the situation in Darfur in the very beginning, there was a lot of international attention. But in 2009, when President al Bashir of Sudan was indicted, he kicked out and expelled all the humanitarian organizations, therefore become very, very isolated. And at that moment, this is the time in which we established the organization because the attention on Darfur start fading out. NGOs are start moving away because there was no funding, and politicians started speaking about it because there was no information coming out of Darfur. The government have completely isolated Darfur, preventing journalists from going, preventing NGOs from going in. So it was very discouraging to looking at the situation. You know that our people are in millions out of their homes. They are suffering in silence and nobody was talking about them. So it was really disappointing. But for me, it was not an option to get disappointed and get discouraged. So at that moment, we said we must have to show people that we can do this and we have to do it ourselves so that we can encourage other people to do it. And then around that time, we started establishing the organization. Number one, to meet the promise that I made for women in my homeland, and also to sustain the attention on Darfur, as well as also the other principle of founding of the organization is that we understand that genocide does not happen in an overnight process. It is a long term discrimination, marginalization, othering, and all of that. So before you can put people in a situation whereby people feel they can deserve to be killed. So it's a long process. And in order to end genocide sustainably, you have to empower people who have been impacted by it and bring them to the center of decision making, because we do believe if Darfuri were part of the presidential cabinet, they would not have made that decision to kill their people. But because we are not part of the decision making, we are not part of the shaping the culture or social or economic and political life of the Sudanese people. And that's why we were put in a helpless situation whereby others can come and make decision on our behalf to eliminate an entire community. And that is why we insisted that our organization must make the case for the international community to empower and include the voices of those who are impacted if we are to end the genocide in the world, whether it is accountability, whether it is peace negotiation, humanitarian, or any kind of conflict related response. It has to include those who are impacted, because these people know their issues and they have the ability and the capability to be a part of any solution. They can be partners in change making, that they cannot be perceived as victims, but also as advocate and expert and policy shapers of all these institution. And that is why so we founded the organization, but not without challenges. I decided, because it was very challenging, there was no funding available, so I decided to run the organization for 6 years before asking any kind of financial support from anyone, because we wanted to show the people that we can do the work and that we are capable of, using my own expertise and support from volunteers and other people who believe in our cause. And then by that time, we were able to demonstrate outstanding ability to advocate, and also not only speaking for our people, but also giving them a voice on a global stage. We have brought women to meet with the member state of the UN Security Council, with the African Union Peace and Security Council, and we took people to advocate for women inclusion in the process of justice. And we're on the ground, and we are still on the ground today. As everyone left the Sudan, our teams are on the ground working among our people to not only just give food, water, and protection services, but also giving hope to people that we have not abandoned our people. And that is why I think this organization, for me, even we are small, our mission is huge, but we felt that our organization have become a symbol of hope for millions of Sudanese today. And we also have been speaking in all these international and regional forum, bringing the voices of those whose voice have been oppressed. So our organization is small, but what we are doing a lot. We are pleased to be everywhere, bringing the voice of our community to these forums so that we can help them create and inform policy decision that will help bring sustainable solution to our issues.
Thank you so much for that. And I'd just like to, applaud you for the amazing work that you've done within the organization and for African women. And I think you speak so much to why we establish platforms like African Female Voices, where we have to initially start off self funding because you believe in the mission so much. You're passionate about what you do, and you've made certain promises. For us, it's always been amplifying the voices of women. And I think it speaks to also your heart for women, and I think that's such a powerful thing in the world of social media and accolades and wrong intentions and political affiliations. I mean, the work that you do speaks for itself, and I'd like to applaud you as an African female voice. Your work does not go unnoticed. And since we've come to the end of our podcast, I would like to just maybe wrap up by just getting into maybe some of the success stories or milestones that you've achieved within your organization in advancing its unique goals and advocating against atrocities faced by women since its establishment in 2000. And lastly, how can ordinary people like me and people who are listening to this podcast, how can we get involved in ensuring that the work that you do and get involved in ensuring that we become allies with women in Sudan who are facing all of these issues? How do we get into that space? And maybe
Mhm.
again, outside of us as ordinary civilians who want to actually play a role in advancing the mission, if somebody's listening today and they are part of an organization or even a business that caters for ensuring that organizations like yours are advanced, how can they get hold of you and actually partner with you?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share that with you. Speaking about stories of success, I can, unfortunately, the success we want to see is that genocide ends in Sudan and perpetrators are held accountable and that there is no longer any crisis in Sudan. But unfortunately, that's not the case. However, we have like short term successes that we have seen. Today, we are proud to say that even though we are small, we have not abandoned our people. Our organization have been having operation in very remote areas in Darfur, in places that are hard to reach. Many international organizations with large funding and large operation and staff are unable to do so. We are able to do. We also have brought the voices of the survivors and the affected communities to the highest level of policy making on a global stage. We are not only speaking for them, but we enable them to speak. We also have organized the Women Empowering Women a dialogue circle whereby we empower women, Sudanese refugees, and other African refugees who come here, migrants in the United States, to receive training, quality education, some of whom have received their master's degree and landed their best job opportunities and become support to our community today. And we have now created a network called Advocacy for Atrocity Prevention and Justice in Darfur. It is a network of over 20 organizations from inside Sudan, those who are located in Africa and in the diaspora. They have come together to advocate and ensuring that the atrocities in Sudan must be addressed sustainably, and that people must be empowered and perpetrators must be held accountable. Even though we have a short history and a small organization, we have actively been able to shape the debate on human rights, women rights, and atrocity prevention, not only in Africa, but internationally. And I can make example. For instance, since the crisis in Sudan started, we have been invited to brief the African Union, the IGAD, the UN Security Council. We have spoken to the group led by former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, several times, educating these policymakers about our issues. I've been invited 3 times to brief the UN Security Council, last year twice, and this year, including recently. And today, this morning, I also have briefed the members state of the UN Security Council before the ICC prosecutors briefing next week. So we have become a go-to organization where people come to us for advice and expertise and information sharing, not because we are distinguished, but because of the credibility we have among our people and because of the actual voice and the truth that we bring here to these policy making arenas. And so these are the things that I can go on and on and on and on, but I wanted to be brief. So we also have created an annual conference called Women and Genocide Symposium in the 21st Century, whereby over 8 years we organized 8 symposium in 8 consecutive years that bring about 150 to 300 people in DC, bringing survivors from 9 different countries, not only Sudan, but also DRC Congo, Rwanda, survivors of the Boko Haram abduction from Nigeria, Guatemala, Syria, Kurdistan, Iraq, all of this so that we can support women and give them a platform to have their voice heard. We also brought policymakers from the Department of the State, from the UN, from other international government, so that they can listen and deliberate and develop strategies that will help end violence against women and also end genocide and atrocity crimes. Your next question, how people can help ordinary citizen or people who are in business or in other NGOs. As ordinary citizen, I think I would encourage you to continue to involve with our organization. Check us, check our social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and also TikTok, where you can learn about the issue and educate others, share the information, let the people know that the genocide in Darfur that started 20 years ago has not been resolved and that people are still under attack today. And speak about the situation, take action, speak to your elected official and policymakers, tell other people about it. And if you are someone who is in business or in NGOs, support our effort, partner with us, do whatever you can from where you are to support our effort to show the people of Sudan and the people of Darfur and the women of Darfur that they are not alone. And that is simply, you can do whatever you can from, you don't need to come to DC or go to Addis or New York to make a difference. You can make a difference from a remote village in South Africa, in Southeast Asia, or in the United States or in Europe. From wherever you listen, you can make a difference. Take just one action. We will continue to provide information through our platforms and educate you and provide people more opportunities to take action and engage. And people can also check our website, www.darfurwomenaction.org. Again, darfurwomenaction.org for more information and more engagement. And thank you so very much about this opportunity. And I hope that many others who may listen to this podcast will help amplify the voices of our people and the voices of the people of Sudan so that we can once and for all rally behind and end the suffering of the people of Sudan. Thank
Thank you so much, Niemat. We really appreciate the efforts that you've been involved in ensuring that the voices of women, particularly in Sudan, are amplified, and the work that you're doing within your organization.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity.